This message comes from Intuit TurboTax. Now, Taxes is matching with an expert backed by tech to get you the most money back at TurboTax.com. Experts only available with TurboTax Live. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.
Hello, hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident.
You know, the kids this year, I feel like they're less woke. Did you notice that? They're not into being woke anymore.
It's circled back around.
It's circled all the way around. Yes. And now they're like for what they say they're against.
Right, and they're saying the R word again.
Much like FX's English teacher, I've noticed an uptick in a term I thought was long gone, at least in polite conversation. The R word.
It's always kind of been an undercurrent on social media. It's always been kind of thrown around. Generally speaking, I usually see these upticks when it comes to relation to politics.
Disability advocate and content creator Imani Barbarin, aka Crutches and Spice on TikTok.
Thank you so much for having me.
Noticed this a few years ago.
I noticed that the R word had come back, I want to say, in full force around midterm elections in 2022. A lot of times, anybody who displays what we consider deviant behavior, whether that be political opinions that may not agree with the status quo or, societally, we cast them out using ableist language.
As someone who was a young person in the early 2000s, I remember campaigns telling people how harmful the word is.
It's not acceptable to call me a retard or call yourself or your friends retarded when they do something foolish.
And why we should be more aware of the way it can hurt our most vulnerable populations. But it's more than that.
Because disability is so often forgotten, people don't really realize how effective it is. It's not even just the words themselves, it is the sentiment behind them a lot of the time. And you don't even necessarily need to use the R word to wield power against another person.
Ableism isn't just found in our language. It's found in our policies and systems as well. And when disability or the implication of a disability is attached to someone or a group of people, the consequences can be dire.
One of the big examples that I try to give people are conservatorships and guardianships.
I mean, there's a case to be made that the way we use and wield language, that can be the butterfly wings that turns into the tsunami of free Brittany.
But you know what the weirdest thing is? Now that Britney Spears has her freedom and acts the way that she wants to, now what are people saying? Oh, well, maybe that conservatorship wasn't a bad idea.
Today, Imani joins me to get into how she thinks ableism has shaped our political and legal landscape, and why the R word is just the tip of the iceberg.
I think what it really does boil down to is some of our insults towards each other have their own basis in disability. For the word idiot, described people that were public charges that weren't capable enough to live on their own and handle their own affairs. However, were disabled enough that the community had to take care of them.
So to describe people who were unable or who were deemed unable to take care of themselves, idiot was one of the words used.
Another one is lame. You can find lame in the Bible. Jesus healed the lame man. And that's always kind of been back and forth as a descriptor for disability. And additionally, it's not just a language thing, it's structural. When we look at anti-trans legislation, you can see that they put the provision to have trans people tested for autism, because if they're then diagnosed with autism, they are seen as less capable of handling their own medical affairs and could potentially be put in things like conservatorships and guardianships, which then could impact their ability to vote. Because in about 7 states, there are restrictions on people in conservatorships and guardianships voting. The attachment of things to disability has always kept people and their rights on the chopping block for a very long time. We talk about Buck v. Bell and sterilization.
For listeners, Buck v. Bell was a 1927 Supreme Court case that upheld, quote, a state's right to forcibly sterilize a person considered unfit to procreate, which included those who they deemed, quote unquote, mentally deficient.
And whenever we decide we want to insult somebody or throw hate to somebody, we attach them to a disability, regardless of whether or not they have one. Even if it's not just saying the word, we see this a lot when it comes to political conversations around competency in office, right? A lot of people want to attach our elected leaders to disabilities to say that they are not capable of being elected leaders. Now, whether or not you agree with them is immaterial. It's the fact that people see disability as one of the most discounting things and a way to take somebody out of the conversation or out of the discourse or out of the power that they have already.
Could you give an example or two of that?
Oh, my goodness. Joe Biden all the time. People have always said, oh, he's cognitively impaired. And whether or not he is material to the fact that, like, you could talk about his policies. You could talk about anything. People see that conversation around competency as a reason why he shouldn't be elected official. Donald Trump, similarly, the kind of this bumbling fool kind of caricature that we have of this man who was still competent enough to get elected a second time.
When we were preparing for this conversation, as we've been looking into the increased usage of the R word, I came across this concept called the euphemism treadmill. It was introduced by this researcher and scholar named Steven Pinker in a 1994 New York Times op-ed. And I will say, he seemed to have a somewhat cynical view of the utility of the euphemism treadmill. Basically, the R word used to be a part of, I believe, like medical terminology, a diagnosis.
Yes, it was.
And then it gets that negative connotation, almost like because of our society's attitudes about disability, then the word becomes an insult. It becomes tarnished. But what he talks about with the euphemism treadmill is that eventually it becomes an insult and then it becomes unspeakable and then it's banished from polite conversation. What feels notable with the R word is that it seems to be running backward on the euphemism treadmill. Like, I can't think of many other words coming back.
What I find with ableism is that because it can be applied so widely, it never really goes away. When we think of like specific insults for certain groups, certain slurs for certain groups of people, they're only applicable to that group of people, right?
True.
When we think of the N-word, it's only applicable to Black people, like effectively. When we think of other insults for different communities, they're only applicable to those groups of people. But for disability, because you don't have to be disabled to experience ableism, it's applied to everyone. When we think about something becoming so out of the realm of possibility for something to say, being so insulting that nobody wants to say it, almost never includes disabled people. One of the reasons why is because we don't talk to disabled people as a society.
About disabled people.
We talk around disabled people.
Yeah.
We talk to family members. We talk to medical professionals. We talk to policymakers. And only in recent memory do we actually talk directly to disabled people like they are adults, like we are a group of people willing to have a conversation with, rather than everybody talking around us in this paternalistic manner, telling us what we should and shouldn't want for ourselves, right? And so when we talk about the R word, do they trust us enough to say that this is something we don't want to hear?
Coming up,
no diagnosis has automatically made you racist. And the flip side of that, which is very frustrating, is that there are people who genuinely believe that racism should be treated like a diagnosis.
More on how disability, racism, and whiteness are intertwined.
This message comes from Schwab. At Schwab, how you invest is your choice, not theirs. That's why when it comes to managing your wealth, Schwab gives you more choices. You can invest and trade on your own. Plus, get advice and more comprehensive wealth solutions to help meet your unique needs. With award-winning service, low costs, and transparent advice, you can manage your wealth your way at Schwab. Visit schwab.com to learn more. This message comes from NPR sponsor Raymond James, a financial firm as unique as the people it serves. Raymond James Financial Advisors consider the unique lives and goals of each client to create full-picture plans that go beyond retirement savings and managing risk. They provide tailored solutions for complex needs through wealth management, banking, and capital markets services. Disclosures at raymondjames.com. Raymond James & Associates, Inc., member New York Stock Exchange /SIPC.
This message comes from Grainger. As a maintenance specialist for a historic high-rise, you know that vintage charm historically needs constant attention, which is why, when it's time to upgrade turn-of-the-century mechanicals, they turn to Grainger. With easy access to 1 million+ products and the scale to deliver when and where you need them, the right tools and supplies are never far away, so you can keep that vintage building running like new. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done. This message comes from Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile took what's wrong with wireless and made it right. They offer premium wireless plans for less, and all plans include high-speed data, unlimited talk and text, and nationwide coverage. See for yourself at mintmobile.com/switch.
I wonder, do you see it as a part of a wave of mainstreaming of offensive language or gestures more broadly? Like, I'm thinking about Kanye West and the way that people talk about Kanye West's mental illness or diagnosis. I don't know all the details of his medical history, but when he says things that are anti-Semitic or deeply misogynistic or racist and anti-Black, people will be like, oh, this is a part of his diagnoses. On one hand, as you've described, I can think of a bunch of examples of disability being used as a reason why someone should not be believed or shouldn't be able to make decisions on their own. But it seems like there are people who are willing to use disability as a means of making an excuse for behavior that many people see as racist or anti-Semitic.
No diagnosis has automatically made you racist. And the flip side of that, which is very frustrating, is that there are people who genuinely believe that racism should be treated like a diagnosis.
I have seen that sentiment online a lot. What that kind of presupposes then is that racism is something that can't be helped, can't be fixed. It's like something of nature as opposed to of society.
Somebody once tried to tell me that they wanted racists to get treatment. I almost reached through the phone.
Treated
by
who?
What are you talking about? But going back a little bit to your point about, why is this language having an uptick?
Mm-hmm.
It has to do with eugenics. Like, after pandemics, eugenics increases. We kind of like separate ourselves on the basis of who's worthy and who's not. And pandemic kind of accelerated our thoughts around disability and eugenics to the point where, like, this is now very normalized language.
That also makes me think back to something that I had seen in a New York Magazine piece written by Brock Collier about the new sort of young conservative or Republican people who are, excited about Trump's second presidency. And something that came up in that piece that I also have seen elsewhere online is people wanting to feel like they can say the R word specifically and have that be okay, or do it without guilt. Many people feel or see a power in that. Some people listening to this might think, at the end of the day, these are just words. So what's the big deal? What would you say to them?
They're not just words. They're larger ideas than just an insult that we can hurl back to one another. And you don't even necessarily need to use the R word in order to wield that sort of power. One major group of people that have been attached to disability are Black people. Taking intelligence tests to vote, right? Because they thought Black people were inherently unintelligent because of being Black. It goes into capacity laws and immigration, where we're telling people to stand on their own 2 feet. That has implications with disability. There's a reason why women were relegated to institutions and lobotomized and had forced hysterectomies because they were attached to a disability. There's a reason why queer men have been historically chemically castrated and experimented on by being attached to disability. This has been our country's legacy. So it doesn't surprise me in any way, shape, or form that the R word is coming back. It doesn't surprise me that people are trying to pinpoint an entire community as the reason why we cannot have progress in this country, whether that be explicitly or implicitly implied through their use of that word.
Well, Imani, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me today. I learned so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was disability advocate Imani Barbarin. You can find her on TikTok at Crutches and Spice. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Alexis Williams.
This episode was edited by
Nina Patak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from Warby Parker. If you wear glasses, you know how hard it is to find the perfect pair. But step into a Warby Parker store and you'll see it doesn't have to be. Find a Warby Parker store near you at warbyparker.com/retail.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Viore, a new perspective on performance apparel. Check out the latest Dream Knit collection by visiting viore.com/NPR for 20% off your first purchase. Exclusions apply. Visit the website for full terms and conditions.
This message comes from Mint Mobile. If you're tired of spending hundreds on big wireless bills, bogus fees, and free perks, Mint Mobile might be right for you with plans starting from $15 a month. Shop plans today at mintmobile.com/switch. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details.